I invited you to watch me replace you.
You chose my building for your engagement. Cole, you said she owned nothing. I found every dollar you hid from me.
The Harrington is marital property. Half is mine.
I owned it 6 years before you married me. You lied to me about everything.
Nadia, please, don't destroy our marriage.
I'm only closing the door.
He stood at the concierge desk of the Harrington, Dallas's most coveted event venue, and signed his name across the contract with the easy confidence of a man who believed the world arranged itself for him. The deposit was steep. He didn't blink. Beside him, Vivian Pierce squeezed his arm and smiled at the gold lettering above the entrance and said, "Perfect. This is exactly the room I wanted." 3 days later, he mailed a formal invitation to his wife, thinking it would sting. He was not wrong that it would reach her. He was simply unaware that the gold-embossed address on the envelope was the same address where his wife signed checks, approved vendor contracts, and had spent 4 years turning a gutted, historic building into the most sought-after event venue in the state. Her name was on every wall in that building. He just never thought to look. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. To understand how a husband can live beside a woman for 9 years and never see what she built, you have to start with who she was before he ever knew her name. Nadia Whitmore was 31 when she met Cole Ashworth at a real estate charity gala, one of those rooms where everyone was performing a slightly elevated version of themselves. She was there because her father's old firm had donated a table. She wore a blue dress that had belonged to her college roommate and did not pretend otherwise when someone asked. Cole was drawn to that. He said later that it was refreshing to meet someone who didn't seem to need anything from the room. 9 years on, he had long since stopped finding her quietness refreshing. Cole was a commercial real estate developer, moderately successful in the way that looked better from the outside than it felt from inside the books. He was handsome in a deliberate way, the kind of man who always wore the right watch for the occasion, and had opinions about where to sit at a restaurant. In the early years of their marriage, his confidence had felt like protection. By year 6, it had curdled into something Nadia recognized as performance. He was performing for a version of his life that hadn't arrived yet. They had no children. The subject had been raised and set aside several times, always by Cole, always with the same reason. Not yet, we're still getting there. What their meant had shifted so many times that Nadia had eventually stopped asking. The house they shared in North Dallas was large and well-furnished and quiet in the way houses get when two people have stopped bringing sound home to each other. Cole's affair with Vivian Pierce began, as far as Nadia could reconstruct it, about 18 months before the invitation arrived. Vivian was VP of marketing at Cole's firm, precise, confident, the kind of woman who made other people feel they needed to explain themselves. Nadia had met her twice at company events and noticed nothing alarming, because there was nothing alarming to notice if you weren't looking for it. Then she started looking. The hotel key card in his jacket pocket, the calendar entries that stopped having details, the particular way he came home tired that was different from the way he'd been tired before. Nadia didn't confront him. She made an appointment with Diana Solis instead. Diana was a family attorney with a reputation for clinical precision and zero tolerance for delay. Nadia had met her through a business contact 3 years earlier and kept her card. When she walked into Diana's office and laid out what she'd observed, Diana listened without interrupting, then asked 2 questions. Do you have access to all of your joint accounts? And does your husband know about your business interests? The answer to the first question was yes, though she hadn't been monitoring them closely. The answer to the second was more complicated. He knows I own property, Nadia said. He doesn't know what it's worth. Diana scheduled a full financial review for the following week. That was 4 months before the invitation arrived. When the envelope appeared in the mailbox, cream and formal, embossed in gold with the Harrington letterhead, Nadia stood at the end of the driveway for a long moment before she opened it. She had received hundreds of documents on that letterhead. She had approved the design herself. She read it once. Cole Ashworth and Vivienne Pierce request the pleasure of your company at a celebration of their engagement. The Harrington Grand Ballroom, Saturday the 14th. Her own ballroom. She went inside, set the invitation on the kitchen counter, and called Jasmine. Jasmine Reyes had been her venue manager for 8 years and knew everything about the Harrington and almost everything about Nadia. She picked up on the second ring, as she always did. He booked the full ballroom for the 14th, Nadia said, without preamble. A pause. I know. He came in last week with his fiancée. I handled it personally. I thought you should know before I reached out. Another pause. Do you want me to cancel? Nadia looked at the invitation on the counter, at her building's address at the top of the card. No, she said. Let the booking stand. Every detail exactly as they requested. And you? Put me on the guest list. She was quiet for a moment. I'll arrive myself. She hung up and opened her laptop. She pulled up the booking file, the one Jasmine had sent to her account, as a courtesy, and for the first time she saw the full deposit record. Cole had paid $47,000 up front for the full night rental of the Grand Ballroom. The catering package, the florals, the lighting design. The money had come from their joint savings account. She closed the laptop and called Diana. He paid for the party from our joint account, she said. I need you to document that. Already in the file, Diana said, along with 3 other transfers in the last 14 months. I was going to call you today. Nadia stood at her kitchen window and looked out at the backyard she had planted herself 5 years ago. The same year she opened the Harrington, the same year Cole had stopped asking about the hotel at all. Tell me, she said. Diana's voice on the phone was even and direct, the way it always was when the news was bad enough to require steadiness. The 3 transfers she had documented totaled $241,000. Each one had gone to an account registered to Ashworth Holdings, LLC, an entity Diana had already traced through Texas business filings. Cole had registered it 8 months ago. The registered agent was a former colleague of his from a firm they both knew to be on the quieter end of discreet. He's been building a separate financial position, Diana said. Quietly, over time, the amounts are large enough to matter, and small enough to avoid automatic flags on a standard joint account review. Nadia asked the question she already knew the answer to. Is this something a court would care about? Dissipation of marital assets, intentional concealment? Yes, very much. And his preliminary consultation notes from 6 weeks ago mention that his estimate of your separate assets is minimal to none. A pause. He told his attorney you have no significant business interests. Nadia said nothing for a moment. He believes that, she finally said. It wasn't bitterness. It was something closer to a clear-eye outing of how a man can look at something for 9 years and never see it. To understand that, you have to understand Clara. Clara Whitmore was Nadia's father's older sister, one of those women who seemed to have been born already knowing something other people spent their whole lives trying to learn. She had married once, briefly in her 30s, and afterward lived exactly as she chose. She was a teacher and then a school administrator, and then, in her 50s, the unexpected owner of a mid-century hotel that a business acquaintance was selling below value because he needed to close quickly. The Harrington Grand Hotel had been a Dallas landmark in its time. Built in 1934, 12 stories. The kind of building that had hosted political fundraisers and society weddings, and the occasional film premiere before the neighborhood shifted, and the bookings stopped keeping up with the maintenance costs. By the time Clara bought it, it had been operating at a loss for a decade, and its reputation had curdled from historic to merely old. Clara never reopened it as a hotel. She ran corporate and private event bookings out of its ground floor for 20 years under a small but loyal client base, and she kept everything else in careful repair, on a budget that required knowing the difference between what could wait and what could not. She died when Nadia was 32. She left the building, the lot, and Whitmore Properties Group, the LLC she had operated the whole thing through, to Nadia exclusively. Her will was short and to the point. It said, I believe you will know what to do with it when the time comes. At the time of Clara's death, Nadia and Cole had been married for 3 years. Cole had visited the hotel with Nadia during the estate process, standing in the lobby with its high ceilings and cracked tile and the particular smell of a building that had been slowly emptying for a long time. He walked through 2 floors and then said, with a certain impatient finality, "This is going to cost more to fix than it's worth. You should think about selling." Nadia did not think about selling. She spent the next year studying. She found a structural engineer who had worked on 2 other historic restorations in the city and trusted his assessment over 2 more cautious opinions. She negotiated the asbestos remediation contract herself. She took out a mortgage on the property and used it to fund the first phase of reconstruction, and she drove to the building at 5 in the morning 2 or 3 times a week to check progress before Cole woke up. He never asked why she was leaving early. He assumed it was her usual restlessness. By the end of the 2nd year, the ground floor and mezzanine were finished. Jasmine Reyes came on board as venue manager through a referral from the structural engineer's office. And she turned out to be the kind of person who understood immediately that the real asset was not the building, but the particular quality of silence in the ballroom when the lighting was right. Jasmine ran the first bookings, built the vendor relationships, and became the face of the Harrington in every context where a face was needed. Nadia's name appeared on the LLC documents, the tax filings, the insurance riders. It did not appear in any profile, any social media account, any press release, or any mention of the Harrington in print. She was not hiding. She had simply learned by then that Cole had a particular way of responding to her successes, and it was not the way she wanted to feel about something she loved. The first time the Harrington was mentioned in a local business quarterly, a short piece about event venues reshaping the city's private event market, Cole read it at the kitchen table and said, "Without looking up, your hotel got mentioned." He turned the page. Nadia said nothing. By year 4, the Harrington had a 2-year waiting list for Saturday bookings. An art director from a national bridal magazine had shot the grand ballroom for a feature on heritage venues. 3 corporate clients had signed annual exclusive agreements. Cole had been to the building once. He had no idea what it was worth, and because he had decided it was nothing, he had never looked. This is what Nadia meant when she told Diana that Cole believed his own estimate. He had formed a conclusion early and stopped gathering evidence. The Harrington had risen around him in plain sight, and he had simply never looked at it again. He told his attorney, "I have no significant business interests," Nadia repeated, and she heard how strange it sounded now. Not insulting, exactly, but off. The way a statement sounds when it is so far from true that it has stopped being about you and become only about the person who said it. "The good news," Diana said, "is that Whitmore Properties Group predates your marriage by 6 years. The original deed transfer from Clara's estate is dated 43 months before your wedding. Under Texas law, with the documentation we have, his claim on the Harrington is not viable. It was never marital property. What about the $241,000? That's a different matter. That's marital property he moved out of the joint estate. That will be a central issue in discovery." A pause. "Nadia, you can file right now. I can have papers served by end of week. His financial accounts will be frozen and the Ashworth Holdings transfers flagged." Nadia thought about the invitation on her kitchen counter, the gold-embossed address that was her building's address. "Not yet," she said. "I want to wait. Until after the party. Until after the party." Diana was quiet for a moment. "All right. But I want everything documented and ready. The moment the 14th passes, we move." "The moment the 14th passes," Nadia agreed. She hung up the phone. The backyard, through the window, was still in the late afternoon light. The garden she had planted the same year she opened the Harrington. The same year Cole had stopped asking. She had built 2 things in the same period of time. One of them was invisible to her husband. One of them was planted in the yard behind the house they shared. He had never once knelt in the garden either. The marriage had not broken all at once. That was the thing about it. The thing Nadia had turned over in her mind during the long evenings when Cole was somewhere else, and she was in the kitchen with a glass of wine and the particular quality of silence that comes from a house that has more rooms than it uses. It had faded. Piece by piece, in ways that were small enough to overlook individually and only visible as a pattern when she stood far enough back. In the early years, Cole had been present. That was the word she always came back to, present. He asked about her days and meant it. He came to the building when she asked and said the right things about the stonework even when she could see that he didn't quite understand what he was looking at. He held her hand in public without thinking about it. When his mother, Patricia, made one of her oblique comments about Nadia's background, practical was Patricia's preferred word, delivered in a tone that made it a criticism. Cole had redirected the conversation, gently but clearly. That had stopped somewhere around year 5. Nadia couldn't trace the exact month. She remembered a dinner at Patricia's house, when his mother said something about how Nadia's quiet nature must make it challenging to build the kind of social presence Cole's work required. And Cole had simply changed the subject without defending and without acknowledging. The absence of defense had been so quiet that she almost didn't notice it. But she noticed it. After that, she began to pay a different kind of attention. Cole's commercial real estate projects were, she understood gradually, not doing as well as they appeared from the outside. He had a talent for projection, for making a deal in early stages sound like a completed success. And his professional circle, which rewarded confidence above most other qualities, had accepted his performance for a long time. But there were signs. The same projects mentioned over dinner for months without closing. The way he answered questions about work with generality instead of specifics. The particular tightness around his eyes when Nadia mentioned the year-over-year growth at the Harrington, which she did rarely, and only in response to direct questions, but which she noticed him filing away in a place that was not quite pleasure. Vivian Pierce had joined his firm 14 months after the dinner at Patricia's house. Nadia met her twice at company events and thought, both times, that Vivian was exactly the kind of person Cole found reassuring. Sharp, visible, unambiguous in her confidence. The kind of woman who made a room feel like it had a center. Nadia was not that kind of woman. She had never wanted to be. The changes after Vivian arrived were small at first. Cole came home later. He was distracted in the way that isn't tiredness, the way where someone is present in the room but their attention is somewhere else entirely. He stopped asking about the Harrington even as a courtesy. He stopped asking about most things. The hotel key card appeared in his jacket pocket on a Tuesday in October. Nadia found it when she was sorting laundry. A cream-colored card from a boutique hotel she recognized, from a neighborhood she knew he had no business reason to visit. She held it for a moment, set it on the dresser, did not mention it. She called Diana that afternoon. Diana's initial review had taken 3 weeks. She came back with a clear picture. Cole had, over the previous 14 months, been conducting a systematic and deliberate effort to understand, and then to obscure, the financial structure of their marriage. He had consulted a divorce attorney 6 weeks before Nadia called Diana. He had begun transferring money from the joint savings account to Ashworth Holdings LLC within days of that consultation. His legal strategy, as Diana had been able to reconstruct it from preliminary court filings, was built on a specific premise, that Nadia had no independent assets of significance. His attorney had characterized her as a person of limited separate financial interest with a hobby-level business activity in event planning. The language was casual and dismissive in the way that legal language sometimes is when the person drafting it has never bothered to check the underlying facts. Nadia had found this almost admirable in its completeness. He had not merely failed to see what she had built. He had actively constructed an alternative picture of her, small, peripheral, dependent, and presented it to his attorney as fact. He believed it. That was the part she kept returning to. He was not being strategically deceptive about her. He had simply decided who she was years ago and stopped looking. The engagement party invitation had arrived 3 weeks after Diana's initial findings. Nadia had read it on the driveway, recognized her building's address, and felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief. It was closer to the feeling of watching someone walk very confidently toward a cliff. They haven't noticed yet. She had told Diana she wanted to wait. But in the weeks between the invitation and the party, she did not sit still. She asked Jasmine to pull the complete financial picture of the Harrington, 3 years of profit and loss, the current property valuation, the client list, the booking pipeline. She reviewed it carefully. She made sure Diana had full copies. She also called her aunt's old attorney, a man named Gerald Webb, who had handled Clara's estate and who had always known exactly who Whitmore Properties belonged to and what it was worth. "I might need you to be available on the 14th, she told him, just in case. Available in what capacity? As someone who can speak to the history of the ownership if anyone needs it documented quickly. Gerald said he could do that. Patricia Ashworth called Nadia on a Wednesday 9 days before the party. Nadia had half expected this call. Patricia was not the kind of woman who left things to develop on their own when she could shape them. "I think it would be gracious of you not to make a scene," Patricia said, with the particular warmth of a woman who believes she is doing someone a favor by insulting them gently. "Cole has found someone who suits him better. That's not a reflection on you." Nadia held the phone and looked at the booking confirmation on her screen. 280 guests, catering for 300 to be safe, the grand ballroom and the mezzanine. Her building, her florals, her chandelier lighting system that had taken 4 months to source. "I appreciate the call, Patricia," she said. "You'll be civil about this at the party? I did think it was odd he invited you, but Vivienne wanted it done properly." "I'll be myself," Nadia said. "That's all I can promise." Patricia seemed satisfied with that, or at least finished with the call. She said something about hoping they could all move forward with dignity and hung up. Nadia set her phone down. She opened her laptop and looked at the floor plan of the grand ballroom, the room she had designed, the room she had watched go from raw concrete to the most photographed event space in North Texas. The room Cole had booked for a party to celebrate the woman he was replacing her with. He had sent the invitation thinking it would hurt her. He was not wrong that it would affect her. He had simply miscalculated the nature of the effect. Diana laid the documents across the conference table in 2 piles. One for what Cole had claimed, and one for what was actually true. The gap between the 2 piles was considerable. His attorney characterized Whitmore Properties Group as a purse-side venture with limited financial significance, Diana said, setting a printed page from Cole's preliminary filings beside a current property assessment. The numbers were not close. They estimated the value of your business interests at somewhere between 0 and uncertain. This is based on no research that I can find. He appears to have told his attorney what he believed, and his attorney filed accordingly. Nadia looked at the property assessment. The Harrington building and lot, assessed at current market value for a historic landmark property in its neighborhood, was worth significantly more than Cole's entire real estate portfolio. As of the last quarterly review Diana had obtained through standard discovery requests, he's going to argue that any value I created during the marriage accrues to the marital estate, Nadia said. He is, and that argument would have some legal merit in some circumstances under Texas law. Except, Diana slid the other pile forward. On top was a document Nadia had seen many times. Clara's will, the deed transfer from the estate, and the Whitmore Properties Group LLC registration date. The property transferred to your ownership 43 months before your wedding date. The LLC was established by Clara 31 years ago. You became the registered owner, sole member, and operating officer before Cole Ashworth was ever part of your life. That's his claim gone, and the renovation work I did during the marriage, your labor during the marriage. Investing into a separate property asset you owned prior to marriage does not convert that asset into marital property. There are cases that cut differently around commingled funds, but we have clean documentation that the renovation was financed entirely through a mortgage on the Harrington property itself, not from joint accounts, not from any marital funds. The asset remained separate throughout. Diana folded her hands on the table. His claim is smoke. It was always smoke. He just didn't know enough to know that. Nadia was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about the $241,000. Diana's expression did not change, but there was a particular stillness that Nadia had learned to read as Diana preparing to say something that required careful delivery. The transfers to Ashworth Holdings LLC represent a deliberate movement of marital assets outside the marital estate. In Texas, this is termed dissipation, and when it's intentional and designed to deprive the other spouse of their fair share in a divorce proceeding, it triggers specific legal consequences. At minimum, a court will order that the amount be reconsidered in the final property division and credited entirely to your side of the ledger. A pause. At maximum, if we can demonstrate that the transfers were concealed specifically in anticipation of divorce, it becomes fraud on the marital estate. That carries its own remedies. What does he think? Nadia asked. About the transfers. Does he think I know? Based on the language his attorney has used in preliminary correspondence, no. They appear to believe you've been monitoring the joint account at the level of ordinary household expenses, not investment-level transfers. They think the transfers are invisible to you. Nadia had been monitoring the joint account for 4 months. I want to let him believe that, she said. Until after the party. Diana did not look surprised. She had stopped looking surprised at Nadia's decisions several weeks ago. Can you walk me through why? She asked. It was not a challenge. Diana simply liked to understand her client's reasoning. His whole plan depends on a specific version of me, Nadia said. Small. Uninformed. Without resources, he told that story to his attorney, to Vivienne, probably to his mother. He's going to walk into that party, believing every piece of it. She looked at the 2 piles on the table. He chose my venue because it's the best in the city. He doesn't know it's mine. When he finds out, and he will find out, because I intend to be there, he's going to understand, in one moment, how wrong he was about all of it, not just the building. All of it. Diana studied her for a moment. And what happens when he understands that? His attorney's entire strategy collapses. His financial position is exposed, and he has to stand in my grand ballroom and feel all of that in front of 280 people. She paused. I'm not doing it for the 280 people, but I'm not going to pretend they won't be there. Diana nodded slowly. I'll have everything prepared. The full property documentation, the Ashworth Holdings transfer records, the LLC history, Gerald Webb on standby. The moment the 14th passes, we file. The moment it passes, Nadia confirmed. She gathered her copies of the documents and slid them into her portfolio. The afternoon light through Diana's office windows was flat and clear, the kind of light that made everything look very precisely like what it was. One more thing, Nadia said at the door. Cole called me last week. He asked if I'd received the invitation. Diana raised an eyebrow. What did you say? I told him I'd be there. She considered for a moment. He laughed. He thought he'd said something unkind. And had he? He thought he was inviting me to watch him win, Nadia said. He doesn't know he invited me to a room I own. She left Diana's office and drove home through the early evening traffic. She did not stop at the Harrington, though she passed within 4 blocks of it. She had been there the previous morning, early, before the day staff arrived, walking through the empty rooms in the particular quiet that she loved, and that had been hers alone for 6 years. She had a plan for the week ahead. Small tasks carefully ordered. A dress to collect from the tailor. A call with Jasmine to review the 14th's logistics. A conversation with Gerald, and on the evening of the party, a drive across town to a building that had her name in its foundation, where a man who believed he understood her was waiting to feel like he had won. He would not feel that way for long. But she was not doing this to hurt him. She had examined that impulse carefully and found something else underneath it. The need to stand in something she had built and be recognized for it, at least once, on her own terms. The need to let the truth take up the space it had always been entitled to. That was the thing about building in silence. Eventually, the building speaks for itself. You just happen to be willing to let it. The week before the party, Nadia went to the Harrington early on a Wednesday morning before the building staff arrived. She let herself in through the side entrance with her key, the same one she had used for 6 years, and stood for a moment in the corridor that ran behind the kitchen. The building smelled of the cleaning solution Jasmine had sourced from a supplier in San Antonio, and beneath it something older, the particular cold stone smell that belonged to the building itself. and had never fully gone away even after all the renovation work. She had grown to love that smell. It was the smell of a place that had a history before her, and would have one after. She walked the ground floor slowly. The corridor leading to the grand ballroom had new drapery, a soft gold that Jasmine had selected for the season, and that Nadia had approved by email, without commenting that it was the same shade she had originally chosen for the mezzanine renovation 3 years ago. Some instincts, she had found, were consistent across people who paid close attention to rooms. The ballroom itself stopped her, as it always did, not because it was spectacular, though it was that. The proportions of the room were original, 30-foot ceilings, the arched windows that ran the full height of the east wall, the plasterwork along the cornice that had taken 4 months to restore. What stopped her was the particular quality of the light at this hour, coming in low and gold through the east windows, and lying in long bars across the parquet floor. She had specified that floor herself, a reclaimed oak that matched the original material as closely as she could source it, at a cost that had made her accountant ask the question twice before she confirmed it. The room was the same room that had appeared in the bridal magazine, that had hosted 6 corporate galas and 43 weddings and 2 fundraising events for organizations she believed in. The room where, in 4 days, 280 guests would gather to celebrate the engagement of her husband and another woman. Her husband and another woman, in her room. She stood in the center of the floor and let herself feel the full strangeness of it. Not for long. She had learned a long time ago that extended feeling was not the same as useful feeling, but enough to be honest with herself about what this moment was. It was not triumph, it was not grief. It was something more complicated, the feeling of a person who has spent years in a relationship that slowly stopped having room for them and is now, finally, making a decision about how to leave it. The decision just happened to involve a room she owned. She crossed to the wall where Clara's portrait hung. It was a photograph technically, a large format print, black and white, of Clara standing in front of the original Harrington Grand Hotel entrance in what Nadia estimated was the early 1960s. Clara would have been in her 30s. She wore a structured coat and was looking at something to the left of the camera, out of frame, with the expression of a person who had just thought of something and was deciding whether to say it. Nadia had chosen the photograph from a class's estate. She had it printed to this size and framed and hung here because it seemed right that the person who had preserved the building through the decades when it could easily have been lost should be present in the most beautiful room it now contained. Cole had never seen this portrait. He had never been back inside the building after that single early visit. She looked at Clara for a moment. "I'm going to tell them," she said quietly to the photograph. It felt less strange than it might have, having spent years making decisions in rooms where no one was watching. "I don't know exactly how it will land, but I'm going to be here when it does." She thought Clara would have found this reasonable. Jasmine arrived at 7:30, surprised to find Nadia already in the building. She had coffee and a clipboard and the practical energy of a person who had 8 months of logistics in her head and needed to make sure they were all in place. "Walk me through the 14th, Nadia said. They went through it together. The setup crew would arrive at noon. Florals were confirmed, a firm from downtown that Jasmine trusted for the scale. The catering team would begin staging at 3. Lighting check at 5. Guest arrival from 7. His +2 is the mother, Jasmine said, consulting the guest. List, Patricia Ashworth. Table 4. Nadia noted that and moved on. "Where am I?" she asked. "I left a standing position for you near the east corridor entrance. You'll have a clear sight line to the ballroom and the stage and access to the event coordinator station if we need it." "Good. And the insurance addendum?" Jasmine looked up. "The supplemental rider for the catering expansion, the one that needs owner authorization." She met Nadia's eyes. "It's a real document. It needs a real signature. I just scheduled it for that evening, specifically, rather than handling it beforehand the way I normally would." Nadia nodded. "At what point in the evening?" "After the toasts," Jasmine said, "when the room is settled and attentive, and the noise has gone quiet for a moment." She paused. "I'll bring you the microphone." Nadia was quiet for a moment. She had not asked Jasmine to engineer a moment. Jasmine had simply understood what the evening would need. "Thank you," Nadia said. Jasmine's expression was unreadable in the way that conveyed everything. "I've been running this building for 8 years. I know what it is, and I know who built it. If someone is going to say that in front of the right people," she looked out at the ballroom floor, "I'd like to be the one who says it." They finished the walkthrough and Nadia left the building at 9 before the staff began arriving. She drove home through morning traffic. She collected the dress from the tailor that afternoon, a deep green, understated, the kind of thing she would wear to any significant evening event she owned. She laid it on the back of the bedroom door and looked at it for a moment. 4 days. She called Gerald Webb to confirm he was available. Standing by, he said, "I'll have the complete estate, documentation, and the LLC origination records on my desk. If anyone needs to verify the chain of ownership in real time, I can walk them through it." "You may not be needed," Nadia said. "I understand, but I'd like to be available in case you are." She thanked him and hung up. Then she called Diana. 4 days, Diana said. "Everything is ready. The moment you give me the word, we file." "The moment it's done," Nadia confirmed. That evening, Cole came home at 11. She was already in bed, reading. He moved through the house quietly, more quietly than usual, which meant he was thinking about something other than her, and she heard the sounds of him in the kitchen, and then in the hallway bathroom, and then in the guest room, where he had been sleeping for the past 4 months without either of them formally acknowledging the arrangement. She turned off her light and lay in the dark. The building was 4 miles away. In 4 days it would be lit from the ground up, and 280 people would stand in rooms she had built, drinking wine she had curated. Beneath chandeliers she had sourced from an estate sale in New Orleans, and had rewired by a local electrician, who specialized in historic lighting, and had become something close to a friend over the course of 2 years of occasional project work. She thought about Clara's photograph on the ballroom wall, and the particular expression, looking at something out of frame, deciding whether to say it. She thought Nadia had been deciding for 9 years. She thought she had finally decided. The Harrington on the night of the 14th was what it always was at its best, a room that made people feel, without quite being able to articulate why, that they were somewhere that mattered. Jasmine had overseen the final setup herself, as she always did for the flagship events. The florals were white and cream with low arrangements on the round tables and taller arrangements flanking the stage, where the band, a 7-piece jazz ensemble that Cole had specifically requested and that Nadia knew from 5 previous bookings, was already running sound checks at a level that wouldn't carry past the mezzanine corridor. The lighting was warm and precise, the kind that made the room look like a painting of itself. The floor gleamed. The cornice plasterwork threw subtle shadows. The east windows, floor to ceiling, reflected the evening back in long golden panels. Every detail in the room was a decision Nadia had made at some point during the last 6 years. The color of the drapery, the weight of the tablecloths, the angle of the pendant lights above the bar. She had not orchestrated the evening for Cole and Vivienne to celebrate in her building. But she had, over years of careful choices, made the room exactly beautiful enough that they had chosen it above every other option in the city. That was its own kind of answer, she thought, to the people who had assumed she had nothing. The guests began arriving at 7. Nadia watched from the east corridor entrance, where Jasmine had positioned her, as the room filled. It was an impressive room, 280 people who knew how to dress for an occasion, the particular Dallas mix of old money and new ambition, and everyone performing some version of both. She recognized faces: a state senator's wife she had met at a fundraiser 2 years ago, 2 real estate developers, whose firms had hosted events at the Harrington, a woman from the Dallas Arts Foundation who looked briefly, puzzlingly, in Nadia's direction and then away. Cole and Vivienne arrived at 7:30. They came in together, which was the point, the visible arrival, the room turning toward them. Cole wore a dark suit and the particular expression of a man who had been waiting for this moment and found it met his expectations. Vivienne was in a silver dress, that had clearly been chosen to hold the room's attention, and it did. She moved beside Cole with the ease of a person who had always been comfortable being looked at. Patricia Ashworth entered behind them in champagne silk, already scanning the room with the practiced eye of a woman who needed to know exactly who was there and what their relative importance was. She found the people she wanted to find and began moving toward them within 2 minutes. Nadia stayed and watched. The room gave itself over to the evening quickly, the sound of the band, the first round of champagne from the staff circulating with trays, the particular social momentum that a well-run event generates almost immediately. She had seen it happen hundreds of times in this building, and in every other room she had overseen. The Harrington had a gift for making occasions feel inevitable. Cole worked the room in the way she had always watched him do it, moving from group to group, hand extended, story ready, volume calibrated to suggest ease without demanding attention. He was good at it. It was one of the first things she had noticed about him. The way he could make a room feel like he belonged in it. She had found that attractive once. Now she watched it with the clear eyes of someone who understood that the skill and the person were separate things, and one of them she had loved. Vivian caught sight of Nadia at approximately 7:50. Nadia saw the moment of recognition, not of Nadia personally, but of the anomaly. Something in Vivian's attention sharpened and tracked. A woman standing near the east corridor, not holding a champagne glass, in a deep green dress, whom 2 different staff members had just acknowledged with a particular quality of regard. Not the polite professional nod of servers attending to guests, but something more. More like the way people acknowledge someone who has a relationship to the space. Vivian leaned toward Cole and said something. He looked across the room, found Nadia. His expression shifted, the briefest flicker of something that was not quite pleasure. He excused himself from the group he was with and crossed the room. Nadia. His voice was smooth, generous with his attention in the particular way of a man who believes he has won the significant contests of the evening. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "I said I would," she said. He glanced around the room, at the chandelier, at the guests, at the arrangement of the evening, and there was something proprietary in his look, as if he were taking inventory of a room that belonged to him because he had rented it. "It's a beautiful venue," he said. "A peace offering, or something meant to function as one." "It is," she agreed. He waited for something, for discomfort, perhaps, or the small social collapse he had been expecting. She gave him neither. "Vivian wanted to ask you something," he said finally. "About the owners. She's been curious." Nadia looked at him steadily. "Tell her she can ask Jasmine. Jasmine knows everything about the building." Cole nodded as if this were satisfying, and went back across the room. Nadia watched him go. She watched Vivian receive whatever Cole had relayed, and then look, briefly, toward Jasmine, who was managing the event coordinator station near the stage. She watched Vivian move in that direction with the deliberate quality of someone doing reconnaissance. She found Jasmine and asked a question. Nadia was too far to hear it, but knew what it was from Jasmine's answer, a response that was entirely truthful, and said nothing more than it needed to say. Then Vivian turned and looked across the room, not at Cole, at Nadia. Her expression was different now, not hostile, something more careful than that. The expression of a person who has noticed a variable they hadn't accounted for and is not yet sure what to do about it. The band shifted into a slower piece. Conversations settled into the middle register of a room that has found its rhythm. A waiter offered Nadia a glass of champagne and she accepted it, holding it without drinking. On the stage, Cole tapped at a microphone to get the Ruse's attention and began his toast. He thanked the venue, this extraordinary room, without any other comment on it. He thanked Vivian. He talked about finally in the way people do when they mean to imply that what came before was a mistake corrected. He did not mention Nadia by name, Patricia Ashworth. At table 4, watched her son with pride. Several guests applauded. Someone near the back whooped. Nadia stood in the east corridor entrance and held her champagne glass and thought about a woman in a 1960s photograph, looking at something out of frame and deciding whether to say it. She had decided. From across the room, she caught Jasmine's eye. Jasmine was holding a folder, the insurance addendum, the document that required the owner's signature, the paperwork that was completely real and had been scheduled for this specific evening for a specific reason. Nadia gave a single small nod. Jasmine straightened her jacket. The band reached the end of its measure and stopped. Jasmine Reyes had run events in this building for 8 years. She had managed last-minute florist cancellations and power outages, and one notable wedding where the groom changed his mind during the cocktail hour, and she had redirected the caterers and rerouted the guests and made the evening work for everyone who had come in good faith. She was not a nervous person, and she did not perform calm. She simply was calm, in the way that comes from doing something long enough to know what the real problems look like, and what only appears to be one. She picked up the microphone from the band stand with the same unhurried precision she applied to every task in this building. People are trained by experience to understand that a microphone signals something worth paying attention to, and the 280 guests in the grand ballroom understood this immediately. Conversations tapered. Champagne glasses lowered, attention moved toward the stage. Cole, on the near side of the room, turned toward Jasmine with the slight frown of a host who has not been told what is about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jasmine said. Her voice was clear and carried the kind of authority that doesn't need volume to be felt. "On behalf of Whitmore Properties Group, we thank you for joining us at the Harrington this evening. Before we continue, there is a brief administrative matter, a supplemental insurance authorization that requires the venue owner's signature. This will take only a moment." She turned, and the room's gaze followed, toward the east corridor entrance. "It is my privilege to introduce the founder of Whitmore Properties Group and the owner of the Harrington. The woman who acquired this building and oversaw its complete restoration from a derelict landmark to what you see around you tonight." She paused. Nadia Whitmore. Nadia walked forward. She had walked this floor 10,000 times. She had actually counted once. Approximately, from the number of walkthroughs and events and early mornings and late nights, she had logged in the building over 6 years, and 10,000 was a reasonable estimate. She knew where the floor gave slightly at the join between the original concrete and the new parquet she had specified. She knew that the lighting from the third pendant in the south row ran approximately 2 degrees warmer than the rest. She knew the sound the room made when it was this full of people and this quiet. She walked to where Jasmine stood and took the insurance document and signed it without hurrying, with the matter-of-fact ease of a person signing something she signs regularly, which she was. Then she handed the document back to Jasmine and looked at the room. 280 people were looking at her. The silence was the particular kind that comes from collective calibration, the sound of a room adjusting its understanding of something it believed it already knew. She did not look at Cole immediately. She looked at the room. "This was my aunt's building," she said. Her voice was conversational, unhurried. "She bought it in 1987 when it was in worse shape than when I inherited it. She kept it standing for 20 years through a real estate market that didn't always make that easy. When she passed, she left it to me." A pause. "I spent 4 years restoring it. I chose every material in this room. I oversaw every phase of construction. Whitmore Properties has owned and operated this venue for the last 6 years. The room was still very quiet." She looked at Cole. He was standing near the bar. His expression had done something complicated. The progression of understanding had moved through stages she could read from across the room. First, the confusion of a man encountering a fact that doesn't fit his framework. Then a specific memory she could almost watch surface on his face. Some early conversation, the mention of a hotel, something he had dismissed. Then the math. The math was the worst part for him, she could see that. The math of what she had built against what he had assumed. Vivian was 4 feet to his right and slightly behind him. She had gone very still. "Cole asked me to be here tonight," Nadia said, and she heard the particular quality of the room's attention when she said his name, the collective tightening. "I think he meant it as an unkindness. I chose to accept it as an invitation to a room that belongs to me." She looked at him steadily. "Your attorney filed a preliminary claim, that Whitmore properties might be considered marital property. I want to be clear, in front of your guests and in the interest of accuracy, that the deed to this building and the LLC origination of Whitmore properties predate our marriage by more than 6 years. My attorney will be providing your attorney with the full documentation tomorrow morning. Cole made a sound, not a word, the beginning of a word that dissolved before it could form. And there is the matter of Ashworth Holdings LLC, Nadia said. Her voice stayed level. $241,000 transferred from our joint savings account over the past 14 months. My attorney has the complete transfer history. That will be a matter for the court. The room made a sound. Not quite a gasp, more like a collective intake. The adjustments of people who are witnessing something more significant than they came prepared for. Patricia Ashworth sat at table 4 with her hands in her lap and did not move. Her face had the expression of someone performing composure, which is different from actually having it. Vivian Pierce turned slowly and looked at Cole. The calculation in her expression was visible to anyone paying attention. She had chosen this venue specifically. She had done her research on the Harringtons' reputation, its exclusivity, its position in the Dallas event market. She was not a careless person. She had simply not thought to investigate the ownership structure of a private LLC with a name that matched the owner's maiden name. She looked at Cole with the particular quality of attention of someone revising a significant assumption. "You told me," she said very quietly, "that she didn't have anything." The words were not loud. Nadia heard them because the room was very quiet and she was close enough, and because she had been listening for something like them. Cole opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Nadia, then at Vivian, then at the room of people who were watching him feel the floor give under his feet in real time. He had always been good in rooms. He had always known how to work a crowd, how to find the angle that made a moment go the way he needed. But the skill requires an audience that is still finding its position on you, and every face in the grand ballroom had just finished finding its position. There was nowhere to stand that would return the evening to what it had been. Nadia picked up the supplemental insurance form from Jasmine's hand. She had already signed it, technically, but she held it anyway, the way you hold something you have a right to, and looked at Cole one last time. "I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the evening," she said. "Everything in this room was prepared to my specifications. The food, the wine, the lighting, the florals. I hope it's everything you wanted." She turned and walked back toward the east corridor. Behind her, she heard Vivian's voice, still quiet, still directed at Cole, saying something she did not need to stay to hear. She walked to the side entrance, the same door she had been using for 6 years. She pushed it open and stepped out into the Dallas night. The air was warm and still. The parking lot was lit from above. Somewhere inside, the band had begun to play again. She could hear it faintly through the heavy exterior door, the particular sound of an ensemble that has been told to continue regardless, and is professional enough to do exactly that. She stood on the step for a moment. Then she took out her phone and called Diana. "It's done," she said. "File in the morning. I'll have it ready at 7, Diana said. "Are you all right?" Nadia considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I will be," she said, which was not the same thing as all right tonight, but it was an honest answer, and she had decided, some time ago, that honest answers were the only ones she had any use for. She walked to her car. The band played for another 40 minutes. This was not because anyone particularly wanted them to. It was because the band was professional and the event manager, a young woman named Carla who reported to Jasmine and had been briefed to keep the evening running regardless of what happened, gave them the signal to continue, and so they did. Professional musicians at events like this have seen many things, and what they saw that night was one of the more interesting versions of a category of occurrence they understood. A moment where the room's center of gravity shifted, and everyone had to decide, privately and quickly, who they were relative to what they had just witnessed. Most of them decided to stay. Some gathered their coats. Cole stood where Nadia had left him for several seconds after she walked out. The room's attention had not quite moved from him, yet people were doing that polite thing where they returned to their conversations. but leave a portion of their peripheral awareness tracking the person who just had a difficult thing happen in public. He was aware of this. He was also aware of Vivian, standing slightly behind him and to the right. He turned to her. "Vivian," he started. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen from her before, and it took him a moment to identify because it was so different from the expressions that had defined their relationship. It was assessment. Clean, clear, depersonalized assessment, the kind of look that has separated itself from feeling and is operating only on information. "You told me she didn't have anything," Vivian said. The second time she had said it. The second time it landed differently than the first. "I didn't know," Cole said. "I had no idea it was this. You told your attorney she had no significant business interests." Vivian's voice was level. "You filed preliminary paperwork claiming the Harrington as marital property. You have been operating on the basis that she had nothing. I believed that. I know you did. And the way she said it made clear that this was not exculpatory. That believing the wrong thing, confidently and for years, was its own kind of indictment. You made decisions about our future based on information you chose not to verify." Cole looked at the room around him, the chandeliers, the florals, the perfect lighting, the parquet floor, all of it built by the woman he had dismissed as having nothing to offer. He had chosen this room because Vivian wanted it, because it was the best in the city, because it suited the image of the evening he had been building in his mind. "She built this," he said, mostly to himself. "Yes." Vivian picked up her clutch from the table where she had set it during the toast. "And you told me she had nothing." There was no dramatic final scene between them. Vivian was not the kind of person who did dramatic final scenes. She had too much control of herself for that, and too much understanding of what she actually wanted. What she had wanted was a man who had the resources, the stability, and the judgment she needed in a partner. What she had found was someone who had misrepresented all three. She said goodnight to Patricia, a brief, courteous exchange that told Patricia everything without saying anything, and walked out. Patricia Ashworth did not go after her. She understood what had just happened in sufficient detail to know there was nothing to retrieve from the evening and no useful action to take right now. She had her own version of composure, built from decades of managing the gap between how things appeared and how they were, and she reached for that composure now and found it, more or less intact. She looked at her son. Cole was still standing near the bar, holding a champagne glass he had not drunk from in 15 minutes. Looking at the room with the particular expression of a person who has misunderstood something so fundamentally that the correction of it requires rebuilding not just the specific belief, but the entire architecture of assumptions the belief was resting on. "Come sit down," Patricia said. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice she used when the situation required managing rather than feeling. He sat, the band played. People continued to drift toward the exit in the careful way people have when they want to leave a party without appearing to flee it. Devin Carver. A real estate developer who had done 2 deals with Cole over the past 4 years, stopped by the table on his way out. He said something polished and neutral. The kind of thing men say to each other when one of them has had a visible reversal, and the other is both witness and colleague, and not sure yet what to do with either position. Cole nodded. Devin left. Then the table was quiet. Patricia looked at her son. She had many things she could have said. She was aware that she had called Nadia the previous week and told her to be civil. She was aware that she had called Nadia quiet as a criticism at dinners, and understated as a way of implying insufficiency, and that she had never once visited the hotel her daughter-in-law had spent 4 years rebuilding, because she had decided, as Cole had, that it was not worth the attention. She was aware that the room they were sitting in was entirely the product of that woman's work, and that she had attended this party as a guest in a building she had never given a moment's thought to who owned. She said none of this. She said, "You should call your attorney in the morning." Cole said he would. They sat in the nearly empty ballroom while the staff began the quiet work of clearing. Professional and discreet and trained to move around remaining guests, as if their presence were the most normal thing in the world. The florals were still beautiful. The lighting was still warm and precise. The room was still what Nadia had made it. Cole looked at the portrait on the wall, a black and white photograph of an older woman in a structured coat, standing in front of the building's original entrance. He had not noticed it when he came in. He looked at it now. The woman was looking at something out of frame, with an expression he found, in his current state, slightly unnerving. He didn't know who she was. He had never asked. He left at 10:30, alone, in his car, driving back across Dallas toward the house that had been silent in a certain way for months, and that would be silent in a different way now, a way that he was only beginning to understand the dimensions of. He had rented the most prestigious venue in the city for a party meant to announce his future. He had invited his wife because he thought it would hurt her. He had not thought to ask whose building it was. That was the thing. He had simply never asked. Diana filed at 7:15 in the morning. By noon, Cole's accounts were subject to a hold on the disputed transfers, and Ashworth Holdings LLC had been flagged in the discovery process. His attorney filed a response within the week. The response was the kind of document that looks like a position and is actually a negotiation. The claim on Whitmore Properties was withdrawn within 30 days. Once Cole's own attorney completed due diligence, Nadia had assumed they would eventually do, and confirmed what Diana had stated plainly. The Whitmore Properties LLC and the Harrington property deed predated the marriage by 6 years. There was nothing to claim. There had never been anything to claim. The $241,000 was a more prolonged conversation. Courts in Texas take a clear view of marital asset dissipation, and Cole had taken money from a joint account over a 14-month period and moved it to an entity he had sole control of, in a period during which he was in preliminary discussions with a divorce attorney. Diana was patient and thorough, and she had every transfer documented with dates and account records and the registration timeline of Ashworth Holdings LLC. In the final settlement, the $241,000 was credited entirely to Nadia's side of the ledger, with additional consideration for the legal cost of recovering it. Cole signed the papers on a Tuesday morning. Nadia did not attend. Diana handled it. Vivian Pierce left Dallas within a month of the engagement party. She relocated to Chicago, where she took a position with a larger marketing firm. She and Cole had no further contact, or none that Nadia was aware of. She did not think about Vivian often. She thought about her occasionally in the way you think about the part of a story that was really about someone else's need, and forgive it for that reason. Patricia Ashworth called Nadia once, about 6 weeks after the settlement. The call lasted 4 minutes and consisted primarily of Patricia explaining that she had never intended harm and that families go through these things, and that she hoped everyone could move forward with grace. Nadia listened. She said she understood. She did not return any subsequent calls because there were none. The Harrington ran its calendar at full capacity. This was not entirely surprising. The building had been doing that for 2 years, but the speed at which the next 18 months filled was notable. A business profile in a regional magazine ran 3 weeks after the party, written by a journalist who had been at the engagement party as a guest and had spent 2 days on background before approaching Nadia for comment. Nadia agreed to one interview. She talked about Clara. She talked about the renovation process, the structural engineer, the wood floors and the plasterwork, and the chandelier she had sourced from New Orleans and had rewired by a local specialist. She did not talk about Cole. The piece ran with a photograph of Clara's portrait on the ballroom wall. Several people contacted Whitmore Properties afterward, who recognized Clara from her years as an educator and remembered her with affection. One of them was a woman in her 80s, who had attended her own daughter's wedding in the building in the 1970s, when it was still the Harrington Grand Hotel, and who had never known what happened to it after it closed. Nadia met her for coffee and showed her around the building. The part Nadia had not fully anticipated, the thing that cost her more than she had accounted for, was the loss of the private life that had been, until the 14th, entirely her own. She had built something extraordinary in complete anonymity for 6 years. She had walked through her own rooms as an invisible person and found that experience to be one of the best things about her work. After the party, her face was recognized. Her name was attached to the building in the public record. The particular silence of moving through a space without being known was gone. She was still adjusting to this. Some days it felt like a fair trade. Some days it felt like a loss that she hadn't adequately prepared for and didn't have a clean way to grieve. She gave herself space to hold both things at once, because that seemed more honest than choosing one. There was a contractor she had worked with on the Harrington renovation, a woman named Esperanza, who ran a small heritage restoration firm and who had done 3 phases of the interior work. In the spring following the party, Esperanza called about a property on the east side of the city, a 1940s event hall that had belonged to a woman who had died intestate, whose estate was being handled by a nephew who wanted to sell. The building was in significant disrepair. The neighborhood was in the early stages of a transition that Esperanza thought would matter in 5 years. The price was below market for the location. "I thought of you immediately," Esperanza said. Nadia drove out to look at it on a Friday afternoon. It was in worse shape than the Harrington had been. The roof had soft spots. The original terrazzo flooring was buried under 50 years of overlaid materials. The windows were boarded. Inside, in the main hall, there was a quality to the empty space that she recognized. Not sentiment, but something structural. The proportions of the room, the height of the ceiling, the way the light came in through the gaps in the boarding and fell across the floor. The same thing she had felt the first time she walked into the Harrington, with Clara's key in her hand. She called Esperanza that evening. "I'd like to make an offer," she said. She drove to the Harrington the following morning, early, before the staff arrived. She had the key from Esperanza, a new one, cut from the estate inventory, and she carried it in with her, alongside the key that had opened the Harrington's side door for 6 years. She stood in the empty ballroom in the early light, the way she had on many mornings before, but for the first time as the person everyone knew had built it, which was a different feeling from the person who had simply known she built it. Both were true. Both mattered. She was learning to carry them together. On the wall, Clara's portrait, the expression looking at something out of frame, deciding whether to say it. Nadia held both keys, the old one and the new one worn and one bright. The distance between them measured in all the work and years and choices and losses that lay between the building she had finished and the one she hadn't started yet. She hung the old one on the hook beside the ballroom entrance, where the staff passed every morning, where the young people she had hired could see it and wonder, and where, when they asked, she could tell them about a woman who bought a building that was falling down and decided it was worth saving. Then she put the new key in her pocket. She walked out of the Harrington, locked the side door behind her, and drove across town toward the building that was not finished yet. What did you think she should have done? If you've ever had to choose between staying quiet and stepping forward, tell me in the comments. And if stories like this are what you're here for, subscribe. There are more.